Mirror's Edge is one of my favorite somewhat hidden gems of the 2000s. It was an uncharacteristically big risk for EA to take, publishing a game this daring, this unique, in a gaming climate that was dominated by first-person shooters, thanks in no small part to them and another big publisher. Although it wasn't a massive slam dunk or a smash hit, I look back very fondly on Mirror's Edge. It's an interesting take on an action-adventure platformer and one that we rarely see enough of. It's a game about free-flowing movement and insane acrobatics, a game about speed and agility through a totally unique setting. It's about environmental puzzle solving and rewarding curious players who go out of their way to see what kind of secrets are off the beaten path. It's also a game about authoritarianism and corrupt politicians, a game about police brutality and information control, an oppressive government stripping its citizens of their basic freedoms and individualism. This city is beautifully realized with its bright, whitewashed, postmodern minimalist design, where every surface of every rooftop, office, subway, warehouse, and maintenance accessway is immaculate and ostensibly scrubbed clean of any dirt or grime, a reflection of the population. A population in which the city's authoritarian regime is actively trying to remove any person it views as dirt or grime. Mirror's Edge is an incredible game, and I highly recommend you play through it. But there is one sort of strange thing about it. Perhaps you've already noticed it yourself. Something that can go so easily unnoticed but is impossible not to feel. For a city this big, where is everyone? When I was a kid, the mall in my hometown had a Macy's. It's right behind me, actually. The inside of the Macy's is gigantic. It has 2 floors, though people rarely visited the second one. The bottom floor was mainly adult clothing and perfumes, and the top floor was clothing for infants and toddlers and a lot of overpriced kitchen appliances. Hardly something that's going to pique the interest of a community of boomers who were at this point pretty much done having kids. The only times I can think of people wanting to go up there were if they needed to use the bathroom. The only bathrooms were upstairs. I can remember a time that I came here with my mom when I was probably 12, and I had to go. At this point, I was more than old enough to be trusted to go to the bathroom by myself. So I went to the back of the store and up the escalators, and when I got upstairs, what I found was just eerie. Most of the lights were off to conserve power, as people rarely came up here. I remember dozens of rows of clothing racks and shelves. It looked like they hadn't been touched in months. The air was so still, and that space so silent that I could hear echoes of the building settling, only ever broken up by a faint cough or small conversation from somewhere in the distance. No matter how hard I looked, I never found anyone. It seemed like every turn I took led me nowhere. That no matter where I walked, I would only be met with more of the same. Endless clothing, expensive toasters, and the echoes of customers who should be here, but aren't. It's as if no one's been up here for years. How could a place like this, made to accommodate dozens, if not hundreds of people, die so easily? And what we're left with, why is it this? And why is it so much fun? I want to say that I wish I had a word to describe this feeling, but I kind of already do. John Koenig is the author of The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, a book that, in his own words, sets out to fill in the gaps in our language of emotion. It's a book filled with words that were created to describe feelings that were once ineffable, but now, thanks to the dictionary, we can fill in the gaps. Words like sonder describe the feeling that every passerby and stranger you see on the street is living their own life that is just as vivid and complex as your own. You're the main character of your own story, but so are they. The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows knows how indescribable some human emotions can be, but sets out to define them anyway. For our purposes, we're really only interested in one word: kenopsia. Canopsia is described as the eerie or forlorn atmosphere of a place that is normally bustling with people, but is now quiet and abandoned. The dictionary actually goes on to give examples of this: a school hallway in the evening, an unlit office on a weekend, and vacant fairgrounds. The dictionary states that these places are so devoid of people that their absence glows like a neon sign. I've never thought about it this way, but what an incredibly apt description of this feeling. You know what these places were made for, the masses they were meant to accommodate. It's palpable. The heaviness of their absence pervades everything. When I was a kid, my neighbors and I were completely obsessed with Halo Combat Evolved. My neighbors and I used to play split-screen multiplayer for hours. We really couldn't get enough. I can remember one night I slept over at my friend's house. We couldn't sleep, so somewhere around 4 a.m., we got up and started to play Halo. After endlessly killing each other for what was probably a few hours, one of us found out that if you took the ghost and sped it into the back of a scorpion tank, it would cause the ghost to flip wildly out of control. We started experimenting with this idea, trying to maneuver the ghost in a variety of different ways to try and achieve more insane flips. We even tried driving the ghost and the warthog at each other at the same time to try and see how much air we could get. We were having a blast manipulating the game's physics systems. Just stupid fun. Later in the day, I went home and just did whatever it is that 8-year-olds do. But I remember that night I got the itch to mess around with the ghost again. I turned on my Xbox, put in my own copy of Halo, and started a multiplayer match with just myself so I could have free reign to mess around with vehicles. No Covenant, no Flood, no other players, just me and my crazy acrobatic ghost. After a while, the excitement and the silliness wore off, and I was left with this. The frigid wind, the empty sky, an empty land, devoid of all life. I see the map much less for its utility as a multiplayer arena and more of a forgotten wasteland. Its high cliff walls no longer echoing explosions and gunfire, nor the laughter of two 8-year-olds crashing vehicles into each other, but only these piercing cold gales as they blast the frozen valley. Normally, the distraction of my friends and the constant threat of death would keep me locked into the action, always ready for anything. But now I found myself something I've never been able to give myself before: time and freedom. I start to find areas of the map I didn't even know were there. These empty halls between the two valleys, what would they have been built for? Who would have used these? I look off to a vast ocean. What's on the other side? Are there any creatures who live in those waters? Who would have ever come to this place for anything? It's obviously meant for something, but what? I look to the sky and see the rest of the halo above me. I wonder if the rest of this ring world is just as lonely as this small corner I've made myself king of. I think of the valleys, the deserts. I think about the angular metal structures on those sheer cliffs. I think about the dark halls of the library, the island that hides the silent cartographer, and the wreck of the Pillar of Autumn. Could they all be just as lonely as I am? Rockstar does this really cool thing with their games that I don't see a lot of other developers do. They know implicitly that if you're making an open world game, you need to give every place in that world the same level of detail and believability. If you're giving players the freedom to go wherever they want, whenever they want, then everywhere needs to be given the same amount of love as everywhere. This back alleyway where you receive multiple missions has got to feel just as real as the entrance to this old train tunnel that the game never requires you to visit. You only ever come to this dock one time. It's never used for anything ever again. But the air around it is just magic. I might be the only visitor ever seen again by this solitary pier on these murky waters, but I might not be. I know that there's no way for me to get to that lighthouse, but has anyone ever been out there before? Is anyone there now? I leave the bright lights of the city, the casinos, the strip malls. I get on the highway and ride off into the desert. I go further and further until I'm the only person left on the road, dry, cracked, and weathered by the harsh sun. That lonely road eventually leads me to this. An old store, long since closed, sitting out in the sun, in the middle of the desert, a husk of its former self, forgotten. Why were these large slabs of concrete placed on the beach like this? Why were these docks so easily forgotten? How long has it been since anyone else was here? The really cool thing now is that I'm not the only one who feels this way. You can go to any social media site, and the amount of people posting liminal space content is honestly staggering. Picture after picture of empty offices, old children's play places, movie theaters, and pools. Lots and lots of pools. The most interesting thing about the whole liminal space phenomenon is that no one seems to really have a good beat on why they like it so much. And those who do all seem to come to wildly different conclusions. Some are unnerved by places like these. Others are comforted. But the one thing I see more than anything else is just questions. People want to know where a place is, what its purpose was, or why they feel a connection to it at all. There's this deeply human instinct to want to know the answer to everything. We relish in the unknowable, bask in the glory of the enigmatic, and really do seem to take a sort of pride in peeling back the layers of things that seem just out of reach. And the more these questions linger in our minds, the more they start to burn. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter is a game that exudes melancholic ambiguity. Red Creek Valley and the dark history it hides is not always easy to parse. Everywhere you look are the husks that remain from a time where this valley didn't wear the shadow of death on its sleeve. Decaying puzzle pieces that form the larger image are littered all over. The train that won't start. A flimsy tent in the woods. This man whose final moments are spelled out in his own blood. I look to this house built on top of a cliff, now eroding away. A train stop, overgrown with weeds, its wood structure rotting and falling apart. This immaculate church, with nobody sitting in its pews but pitch darkness and the faint residual light from the setting sun. There are no people left. They're all more than long gone. The corpses of their homes insist on that. But I know better. I can't help but feel their presence. Every step I take is heavy, as they carry not only me, but the people who long ago left a piece of themselves here. The history of humanity rarely dies easily. The echoes and scars of our love and our hatred, of joy and pain, they linger on in the world for ages, much longer than we ever could. They remain to tell future generations the stories of who we were, share with tomorrow who yesterday might have been, give them the answers to questions we aren't around to answer anymore. I can't help but think of the inverse, though. What are we left with when we have no questions? When nothing is left to the imagination? What if we already have the answer? And that answer is horrifying.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this.
An official announcement from the Council of Ministers. There has been an accident at the Chernobyl atomic power station. One of the atomic reactors was damaged.
Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine ruptured after suffering a meltdown caused by mismanagement of the plant, the inexperienced personnel operating the reactor, and the cheap and faulty design of the reactor itself. The meltdown resulted in an explosion so powerful it completely destroyed the reactor containment building, exposing what was left of the core to the open air. Radioactive material billowed into the atmosphere in such high levels that it could be detected not just in Ukraine, but eventually all of Europe. Not long after, an area spanning 30 kilometers around the power plant had to be evacuated. To expedite the process, the Soviet Union told the residents of Pripyat and the neighboring villages that they would be gone for no longer than 3 days, and were only to bring what was absolutely necessary. None of them would ever come back. After about 200 days, a large sarcophagus was built over the reactor to contain the radiation, stop it from spreading. And this did work. But it was far too late for Chernobyl and Pripyat. And what we're left with is unimaginable. A radiation-contaminated region that was once home to over 300,000 people. An entire city left to rot. Doomed to be frozen in time for thousands of years. The faint shadows of people who used to call this place home remain as they were nearly 40 years later. Children's toys, books, classrooms, bedrooms, all of it wasted away. I just can't get over the stillness of this place. It was built to be the home of thousands. People would make their lives here. Families would raise children, and those children would someday have families of their own. All of them are gone now, relocated to other parts of the world, or dead. Victims of an invisible demon that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And what's left of those people is the ghost of what their lives could have been, what it should have been. Games have tried to capture this horror many times. Call of Duty, Stalker, and plenty of indies. But no game replicates that dead stillness quite like Chernobylite. Chernobylite is a survival horror game that's set in the heart of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Admittedly, I haven't played much of the main game itself, but the PC version of the game has a mode called Free Play. In this mode, there are no enemies or other people around anywhere. You're free to look around and just explore as you see fit. Chernobylite faithfully recreates sections of the Chernobyl exclusion zone beautifully, and it does so using textures sourced from the real place. Walking down the overgrown streets of Pripyat, the reality of this place hits you extremely hard. I can imagine people out for an afternoon walk, children playing on playgrounds. I look into the windows of the apartment blocks. Each of these windows was a person, a family, people with lives that were just as vivid and complex as my own. God, the heaviness I feel for these people is indescribable. Looking out over the town, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that nobody else is home. Each room of each building on every street, quiet and still. Walking through Red Creek Valley, I could feel the ghosts of Ethan Carter and those close to him all around me. I searched for the clues of their past, and I made them feel more alive in their deaths than anyone before me ever could. But here, where the physical remnants of an entire city are staring me right in the face. The gray and rusty remains of people I'll never meet. All I can feel is their absence, glowing like a neon sign. Outer Wilds was a game I saw at PAX East in 2018. I remember thinking to myself that it looked really interesting and that I'd have to keep my eye out for when it eventually released. It just seemed like a game I'd probably enjoy. That, of course, was the understatement of the century, as Outer Wilds is one of the greatest games I've ever played. It is unapologetically its own thing, a concept I rarely, if ever, see tackled in other games. And even then, they're nowhere near as fine-tuned and well thought out as Outer Wilds. The main idea is this. Outer Wilds gives you a small solar system and the keys to a spaceship. You're then able to freely explore the system as you see fit. Only every 22 minutes, the sun goes supernova and destroys everything, only for you to wake up 22 minutes earlier and start it all over again. You're stuck in a time loop. The dancing of planets around the sun in their perpetual revolutions is simply jaw-dropping. Upon seeing this for the first time, I just knew I had to get out there, really see for myself what was waiting for me. I was ready for this captivating and wondrous adventure. What and who would be waiting for me? The excitement of it all was completely electric. But when you leave home, go out into space, and land on another celestial body, you're greeted with something else. Countless settlements, shipwrecks, bones, traces of explorers, another species, the Nomai, hell-bent on discovering the secrets of the universe. All of them now long dead. Lost souls trapped on a comet with no way of ever returning home. A city built in one of the most impossible places, now crumbling into the void of a black hole. I find teleporters they made, the remains of probes they put into orbit. I find a space station that orbits what feels like inches from the sun. I find out more about who they were, what they were searching for, and why they searched for it. It wasn't long before they uncovered their own horrifying truths. They knew better than anyone else. The universe was coming to an end. Stars all around their galaxy experiencing supernovas in succession, every star system becoming more and more unstable. They try and warn the rest of their species, but a comet carrying extremely hazardous and lethal ghost matter ruptured, killing all of them in an instant. Through countless hours spent searching the solar system for the clues they left behind, I grapple with the realization that the burden of this knowledge is now stuck on me. A completely new species hundreds of thousands of years later. The generations of people just like me who lived their lives, built homes, and created amazing advancements in technology. The children who just want to play hide and seek. The people who only want to sit back on a quiet evening and watch the fire. Adventurers who seek the same excitement and renown as me. Those who just sit and watch the skies. All of them mere minutes away from annihilation. And they don't even know it. But I continue to follow the trail anyway, and after countless time loops I find the end of it. I find the last living remnant of the Nomai in the most unlikely place. I do find a way to stop the time loop, and at the end of it all, the eye of the universe. It's here, after I finally end the time loop, that I watch the sun explode one last time. I think of the solar system I've come to know almost every corner of. I think of home. And suddenly, I'm there. It's quiet. I remember exactly where I am. An observatory on the cliff tops of my home planet. I find an image of a galaxy, presumably my own, just before... More galaxies come into view. All of them similar to mine. I'm in the woods. With nothing left to do, nowhere else to go, I walk. I find all the friends I've made along the way. Could they all have survived the death of my solar system? No. I know better. We play one final song as we watch the eye of the universe mysteriously form something completely new in front of us. All of us together, each a different instrument, each a different perspective on the universe. The one final possibility at the end of time where there should be nothing left. We create one last eventuality. We watch it in front of us as we all, in an instant, collapse into one final contingency before a new universe with new possibilities. I know it may sound foolish or even a bit pretentious to say, but when I played and finished Outer Wilds, it completely changed my perspective. No longer did I see myself as this tiny leaf floating through space and time with no real direction. I don't feel like my insignificance in the grand scheme of the universe and the passage of time mitigates the importance of this experience at all. When I think of myself and all that comes before me, I know what the big eventuality is, and it doesn't worry me anymore. I'm lucky enough to be a small part of the universe having the rare opportunity to experience itself. Pripyat was a city that existed for less than 20 years. Ethan Carter was only 12 years old when he died. How depressing it is that they didn't exist nearly long enough. They didn't have enough time to fully realize themselves, whatever that may mean. What would Ethan Carter have been like as an adult? What would a modern-day Pripyat look like? How many people would live there? As much as it hurts, it could be that their ultimate fate as a city or as a broken 12-year-old boy may just be what defines us in our existence. Or, more likely, perhaps they're just the unfortunate byproducts of being given the chance to exist at all. I really don't want this to turn into a what does it all mean kind of video. That's not my intention. But I can't help but think about the greater influence or meaning of these places that were made for people that carry them no more. We know as we walk through places like this that either the people themselves or more simply time has moved on. These places that end as empty husks of humanity aren't always made to last, whether they last for 100 years or 22 minutes. I think it's beautiful to get to see these places as they are and get a glimpse of what they were. A lot of liminal space photos from social media are intriguing not because they're inherently unnerving or eerie, but because you remember. You remember a time when you as a child went to that movie theater with the confetti carpet. You remember the quiet halls of your elementary school on the night of the book fair. I got to walk through Red Creek Valley at the perfect time in history. To be here when the vanishing of Ethan Carter is capable of being experienced as the developers intended. I'm so lucky to be able to see just enough of Ethan's past life to try and get a glimpse of what it would have, or should have been like. To appreciate him for what he was and what, unfortunately, he never got to be. In a strange and morbid way, we're privileged to be able to see the Chernobyl exclusion zone as it is today, so that we never forget those who lived there, to remember them as people just like us, because they were. Human beings like you and I. The echoes of who they were continue to stay with us, in part so that we don't repeat the same mistakes their leaders made so long ago, so that we can be reminded of just how fragile we are and just how lucky we are to exist. When I walk through empty offices, or this massive mall with no shoppers, when I look out to the lighthouse, or stand in the parking lot of this vacant store, I think a lot about my own place here, and the many perspectives and experiences I've had and will have, and I think about how despite everything, I'm still here. I think about the people that could be here, or should be here, and I think about where they are now.